other people's behavior. Because, I often work in like, this is the most efficient, do it this way, blah, blah, blah. And then everybody else has other ideas or different, and I'm like, oh. Mostly at work. Mostly at work. Mostly at work. At work, oh my goodness. I'd be like, how much y'all getting paid for this? Y'all should know this. All right. All right, okie dokie. Let's. Okay, let us begin. Let us begin. All right, so today we are coming from the subject matter of living in your kingship. This is an important matter because we need a biblical understanding of kingship so that we can build on who we are. This is by far not the only lesson we'll learn on this subject, and in no way is it a complete look at all of the details involved. But I'm going to give you more pieces of this in the months to follow. I think this is incredibly important for us as men. Everything we do is not specific. Everything we'll talk about is not specifically applicable to men in, specific, but it'll be a good look overall at how we can do this thing called being a man of God in this society today, because we live in a society who will have us all over the place as it pertains to manhood, manliness, all of those things. We live in a society that will have us all over the place. So in my own nature, I want to make sure that we are both biblical in content while being practical in application. And like I said before the live stream started, I hope these things come together. Because in my head, it makes absolute sense, but there may be some questions afterwards as to how A relates to B. To study the principle of kingship, one would think that we would study the book of Kings, right? Because, it would be like massively practical to study the shortened version of the Annals of the Kings of Israel, right? Like that would be practical because about kings. Right, like whether good or bad, that's what king. So that it would make sense to have that, so we can have a comparative nature when we talk about what it means to live in our kingship. But that's not exactly where God sent me. It's where I wanted to go. It's where I wanted to go. It would have been the easiest thing to do, but that's not where God sent me. God sent me to another place. I believe that God sent me here because I have a deep desire to see something bigger than using the Bible as a superficial justification for cultural masculinity, right? Because that ain't right. That just leads to people demanding the treatment of the king without bearing the fruit or the work of becoming. Because kingship has absolutely nothing to do with cultural masculinity. It's like basically treat me a certain way because of my genitals, because I happen to fall on that side of the gender, and that side of the gender category. And it's like, no, to get kingship, we have to put in king work. So we're going to come from the book of 1 Timothy. And let me find it. Why is that? The book of Timothy is a cool book because the book of Timothy was written by the Apostle Paul. It was written by the Apostle Paul, and Timothy was a co-laborer or spiritual son of the Apostle Paul, right? And so what was happening in the book of Timothy, it was, as an apostle, Paul would plant churches. He would, he had churches that they were building, the church of the Lord all over, right? And so there was a church, the church at Ephesus, that they were going sideways in the way that they were teaching. So the doctrinal teaching started going left field, right? It started being not what Jesus was trying to teach, but it became this sort of going backwards into what we have been learning or have been knowing, and trying to somehow make that compromise what we knew or where we had been to where Jesus wants the church to be today, right? And so the church of Ephesus start going left. So Paul sent Timothy to go, so to speak, get the church of Ephesus in line. Go correct the church of Ephesus. We need to fix this, right? Timothy. So Paul wrote this letter to Timothy to get Timothy to give him structure. This is a letter that Paul wrote to Timothy. And so the church of Ephesus they had doctrinal issues, like they were doing things like the leaders, they were teaching them proper doctrine, like, to get into heaven, you can't get married, right? To get into heaven, you can't eat certain foods. Mostly that was talking about meats and stuff like that. They were going down the road of the Torah, and Jesus had come to sort of explain that the Torah was how I could show humanity its flaws. Like the Torah was for me to give humanity, basically show humanity itself, right? And so, but they were going down the line. They were going back and trying to go back to those sort of practices where all we were doing is legalistically, legalistically going A, B, C, and D, and this is how you get to heaven. And Jesus, this is not the teaching. This is not the way Jesus is trying to run, the New Testament church. Wait a minute. Oh, right. Okay. Sorry. So they were teaching things that oppose the nature of Jesus. Teaching things that oppose the nature of Jesus matters a lot to Jesus, especially when you're teaching things in the name of Jesus, right? And so this is what they were doing. Not only were they were creating their own doctrine, they were creating their own theology using the name of Jesus. I'm doing this in the name of Jesus, right? This bothered Paul, obviously, right? Because, you can't teach Jesus if you're not actually teaching Jesus, right? And so it's very, and if you think about the church of Ephesus, it's very difficult to change what you believe. Your whole culture surrounds what you believe. You're indoctrinated in this thing. So what we often try to do is compromise or cross over so we can still stay in the one place while being mentally and emotionally somewhere else, right? And reverting back to where you were is easy. It's hard to change when you've been hard to change what you've been indoctrinated into. Even the women of the church of Ephesus began to convert what was intended to be an organic spiritual experience into what could only be described as a fashion show. The more and more they had this gathering of church, the more and more it became about what you wore, how fancy you could get, and how you presented yourself. This was a huge problem because it began to isolate people who couldn't afford to get this fancy. So the church began to become a niche, a clique, the in-crowd thing to do. This obviously was not the intention of the New Testament church that was given to us in the book of Acts. Though this was a church that was going its own direction, making up its own theology, and following its own vibe. And the world, even today, the world would encourage us to do just that. Follow your own direction, make up your own theology, and follow your own feelings down whatever black hole it may take you. The same feelings, so Paul, the same feelings that the world would encourage you to do today is the same thing that was happening to the church at Ephesus in the first century. Because we haven't changed, right? We're still people, we haven't changed. We got cell phones, but we haven't changed, right? Technology has advanced far quicker than humanity, right? So Paul sent a letter to one of his spiritual sons and said, you're closer to Ephesus than me. You go down there and get them together. Timothy, I need you to give this church an entirely new structure that is representative of the way Jesus wanted the church to look. So Paul sent Timothy, in a letter a new structure of how the church was supposed to look. And you know, sometimes in the Bible, if you're not reading it from a spiritual point of view, you miss this subtlety. We know that Timothy was a spiritual son of Paul, and he was loved by Paul, because also in the letter, Paul says something that was odd in the letter that had nothing to do with Ephesus. He said, Timothy, don't drink water only. Drink a little wine every day because of your stomach issues, right? Which was odd, right? And interesting, every time I've ever been taught that, it was taught as if he was talking to me, right? But he was not talking to me in that he was specifically talking to the person he was writing the letter to, saying that, hey, you know, you got a little stomach issues, don't be drinking all the water, drink a little wine too, you know, on a daily basis, which tells you a lot about how Paul cared about Timothy, right? And it also shows you, as Timothy did the work of the Lord, Paul was building an organization that would take care of the church based on what that organization that represented what God was trying to accomplish. Because we talk a lot here, we will and have talked about vision and strategy, controlling our impulses, and what it takes to build a family. And what is interesting is that God's idea of this church structure is not dissimilar to God's idea of the family structure. So let me show you something. Paul told Timothy he wanted him to install new leaders and new overseers inside of the church at Ephesus, inside the church at Ephesus. And if we look at 1 Timothy, I'm going to skip over some stuff, but look over 1 Timothy 4, not from the King James Version. 1 Timothy 3 and 4, excuse me. As there was structure being given to the church, he said in verse 4, he must manage his own family well and see that his children obey him, and he must do so in a manner that is worthy of full respect. If anyone does not know how to manage his own family, how could he take care of God's church? He must manage his own family well, and he must do it in a manner worthy of full respect. And that's how you could, in that day, that's how Timothy was to get the organization of the church together. That's how he could get the organization of the church together. Which proves something to me, that God trusts people to build his church when then he have proven that they can be successful in building their own family and building their own place. So imagine that in order to be an overseer in my church, you can be an overseer in my church, but you have to prove that you can do that. I can give you this when you prove to me that you can do that, which was build a family. And what occurred to me is that before I could go into kingship, I had to understand what God was trying to say. And what God was really showing me and really saying here, if you could master this, I could take you anywhere. Like if you could master this, everybody's not a preacher, but God is like, I structured my church behind this. This institution, is one of the oldest ones in the Bible, right? This institution of family is old. He didn't really change much when he built the church. He built his body. He built his family. And he said, if you can successfully do this, there isn't a place I can't take you. So with that context, and it's in that context, it's in that framework that I want to get into the subject of kingship. It's understanding that if we can master one thing, which is master leadership and family and life, then we can master, then God, there is no place that God cannot take us. Because understanding how God, if God could trust you with his church, right, which is the mouthpiece of how he gets his word out into the world, which is an important part about your relationship with God, is his church. If God can trust you with his church, and then mastering this, God can trust you with anything. So my point is, I want every man in this place or on the stream to begin to see themselves as a king. Not in the stereotypical, superficial, or frivolous sense of the word, but in the work and the action. Because the more you become a king, the more you are seen as a king. Right? And it's cool. I wanted to go be all elaborate and over the top today, right? We want to wear crowns and we want to, sort of do that type of thing so we can feel like kings today. But feeling like a king and being a king is two completely different things. Anybody can put this crown on. But the more you become a king, no matter what you're wearing, the more people see you like a king. So the first thing, so this is a lot to go through. So I'm not going to go through all of it. I'm only going to go through a portion of it today. But I want us to consider that kings have kingdoms. And every one of us has one. And so I want to challenge us to understand how our kingdom functions. So the first question I want to ask you, what is the vision for your kingdom? Your kingdom is your life. Your kingdom is your surroundings. Your kingdom is what you are building. What is the vision for the thing, the life, the family, the kingdom that you are building? And so that becomes our first question. What is the kingdom that you are building? What is the vision for the kingdom that you are building? Second question is, where is the location of the kingdom you are building? And that doesn't, we'll get to that. Where's the location of the kingdom you are building. My kingdom is located right now in this condo in Camp Springs, right? Um, and, the extension of, I would call my kingdom, is in my office in Atlanta, right? That's a kingdom. That's a part of my kingdom that I'm building right now. The next is, what is the culture of your kingdom? Right? What is the culture of your kingdom? Who builds the culture of your kingdom? No, it's all in the same. Who builds the culture of your kingdom? The third question is, how does the economy of your kingdom run? The third question to consider is, how does the economy of your kingdom run? I remember when me and my wife first got married, and she was moving into the house. She found it very important that we sat down and have this conversation about bills. And I said, honey, I already paid my bills. What do you mean? The economy of my kingdom was already running when you got here, right? I already paid it. We don't have to sit down and have a conversation about, I'm not marrying you because I need help with my bills, right? How does the economy function, right? What's your kingdom's main source of income, right? How does the water flow into the kingdom? What's your kingdom's main source of income? Does your kingdom have secondary and alternate sources of income? Right? Have we considered things like, secondary sources or passive, or things of that nature, passive incomes, or, secondary sources? How is your kingdom funded? Right? What are the expenses of your kingdom? What are the expenses? What are the expenses? What are the needs of the kingdom that you're building? What are the costs associated with it? So how are we, if we are stepping into the role of king, and we're talking about being a king, and we're talking about building a kingdom, we consider, how does this kingdom function? How does the kingdom function? Some of us are married, some of us are single. One of us are single. Some of us are married, some of us are single. And, when we begin to understand for singles, how are you as a king preparing for a queen, right? And for us, for those of us who already have a queen, how does your queen understand the vision where you're trying to take your kingdom? Does she understand it? Does she get it? Right? Does she know? Do you know what it is? And that's the most important thing, is knowing, do you have a vision? I gotta take this, not that I just, but I'm sweating in this thing. Huh? Yeah, okay. Does the queen understand what the vision is? Do the people that come around you understand what the vision of your kingdom is. Do the people that come around you understand? How submitted are you to the Lord, and how much space have you given him to structure and restructure your kingdom and your vision? How submitted are you to the Lord, and how much space have you given him to structure and restructure your kingdom? Are we only building on what we have knowledge of, or what we have wisdom of? Or do we trust the Lord enough to give us the vision that he wants for us so we can build on that? When you begin to seriously ask yourself these questions, seriously build a kingdom for yourself, you'll find out a woman will never say to you, I'm looking for stability. Never. Why? Because the kingdom you're building offers her that, and she can see it, so she'll never have to say it. It's in your kingdom. She'll never have to say, I'm looking for consistency. She'll never say that to you, right? Never, never. It just will never happen because she sees your kingdom and she sees its consistency because you've considered how you're going to build it. All these things are the things that people actually think that they're choosing. All of the standards that people think they really have is really not it. It's just a structure of your kingdom, right? And because we as men haven't really begun structuring the thing around us, the women have compensated for that by making these rules and standards of their own. If he ain't got this, then if he ain't got that, but their standards are incomplete, right? They're going off the thing that they've read or experienced in their lives, and they've put together this list of things, but their standards really aren't complete. When they walk into a kingdom, when you have been thinking about your life, and obviously, when you've been thinking about your life and you've been thinking about how you are going to function and how you're going to operate, when you do that, no one questions these simple sort of things. People don't question them. Because here's the thing, if we don't have the infrastructure of our kingdoms together, we could actually never go to the book of Kings. Because the book of Kings is actually about kings. The infrastructure to the kings of the book of Kings is already together. We can't comparatively talk about ourselves and from the book of Kings, because if we skip the process of building our infrastructure, only thing I'll be telling you to do is behave like a king, even though you haven't built a kingdom. Does that make sense? Only thing I'll be telling you to do is, do the king dance, tap dance, whatever, speak loudly and commanding. Right? But if you haven't built a kingdom, all you're doing is doing the dance. Looking the part. So what I want to challenge everybody is when Paul sent Timothy into the church at Ephesus, Paul sent him with a new structure. He structured the entire thing around, he said, we can't put leaders in here unless the leaders can build a family. If they can do that, then they can lead the church, right? And what are my goals to my kingdom? Because I can't get to that if I haven't built it. I can't get to that thing if I haven't built what it is would be my structure for my kingdom. So let's structure the kingdom first, then we can discuss how to behave in it, right? And because once you've built it, the behavior part is actually rather easy, right? It's very difficult to behave a certain way when you haven't built the thing, or you don't have a thing, or you don't sit in a thing. Hey, sit up here, buy yourself a nice chair, call it a throne, put on a crown, and talk like this. What'll happen is the people around you, when they know you're not a king, they'll just be like, they'll laugh at you, right? Because this seems like a joke. Because you're trying to be something that you clearly have not built. And so as we go forth in talking about things like living in your kingship, my first challenge to you is how and have you begin, obviously most of y'all have, but how are you building your kingdom so that you may sit in the place of a king? Any questions?
I think I have a question. I just don't know how to phrase it.
Just stop the stream.